Somewhere in your city, there is a crow that has already told others about you. Not in words, not in any language you would recognize, but in a series of calls, in a specific pattern of alarm, in the particular way it positioned its body when it saw your face or someone's face, and decided, in the span of a heartbeat, that this information was too important to keep to itself. And the other crows listened. They always listen. What happens next is the part that should unsettle you. Because those other crows, the ones who received the warning, the ones who were not there, who never saw the original event, who have no personal history with the person being described, they changed their behavior too. They began watching. I began avoiding. Began treating a complete stranger as a known threat, based entirely on secondhand information passed through a network of dark, intelligent minds that science is only now beginning to truly understand. You have heard of reputations, of whisper networks, of the way information about a person can move through a community faster than that person can move themselves. Crows invented this, millions of years before we did. And the most disturbing part, the part that will stay with you long after this is over, is that the network is still running. Right now, in the trees above your street, in the wires above your commute, in the quiet spaces between the ordinary moments of your day. Information is moving. Assessments are being made. And somewhere in that invisible archive of crow knowledge, there is an entry that corresponds to you. The question is what it says. Point 1. The experiment that changed everything. In the early 2000s, a wildlife researcher at the University of Washington named John Marsluff decided to test something that most of his colleagues considered barely worth investigating. He wanted to know if crows could recognize individual human faces. Not human presence in general, individual faces. Specific people. The kind of distinction that requires not just perception, but memory, categorization, and social communication. To test it cleanly, he had his team wear masks while capturing and banding wild crows on campus. Caveman masks for the dangerous condition. A neutral mask for the control. The captures were brief, mildly stressful for the birds, and entirely standard in wildlife research. And then the masks were put away, and weeks passed. When the masked researchers walked through campus again, wearing the masks, touching nothing, doing nothing, the crows mobbed them, dive-bombed them, screamed at them across open plazas, following them from building to building in a coordinated display of hostility that drew stares from passing students. The neutral mask triggered nothing. The caveman mask, the face that had been present during capture, triggered everything. Researchers didn't expect what they found next. When they tracked the data over the following years, the number of crows responding to the dangerous mask didn't decrease. It grew. Year after year, more birds joined the response, despite the fact that the original captures had long since ended. Birds that had never been captured. Birds that were juveniles during the original study and could have had no direct memory of the event. Birds that were, by any conventional understanding of animal learning, completely uninvolved. And yet they knew. They had been told. By parents. By flock members. By the crow equivalent of a story passed down across generations. Not in words, but in behavior, in alarm calls, in the embodied social knowledge that moves through a crow community the way news moves through a small town where everyone knows everyone and nothing is ever truly forgotten. One researcher who worked on the extended study said something quietly profound in an interview. He said that when he walked across campus wearing that mask years later, surrounded by a storm of diving, screaming crows, he felt something he didn't expect to feel. He felt known. Not recognized, known. In a way that had nothing to do with who he actually was, and everything to do with what a face had once done. In a way that no amount of explanation or apology could reach, because the medium carrying the knowledge was not language. It was something older. But this is only the beginning. Because recognizing a dangerous face is one thing. What crows do with that recognition, the sophistication of it, the social architecture behind it, is something else entirely. And this is where the story changes completely. Crows do not have one alarm call. They have many. Researchers who have spent years in the field learning to distinguish crow vocalizations describe a system of communication that functions less like animal noise and more like a structured language with context-specific signals. There are calls for aerial predators, different calls for ground predators, calls that communicate urgency, calls that communicate distance, calls that seem to carry information about the type of threat rather than simply the presence of one. And there are calls specifically associated with humans. When a crow identifies a person it has categorized as dangerous, through direct experience or through social transmission from another crow, it produces a specific vocalization that other crows in the area respond to, not with generic alarm, but with directed attention toward the person in question. They look, they track, they begin a process of collective assessment that can, within seconds, draw in birds from distances you would never expect to be relevant. Think about what that means in practice. You are walking down a street. You have no idea that a crow on a wire 3 blocks away has received information about a face that resembles yours or matches yours exactly. You are not doing anything threatening. You are simply moving through space in your ordinary way. And above you, communication is already in progress. A network is already activated. An assessment is already being made. You are being discussed, in the only language available to the discussants, by minds that are, by every cognitive measure science has developed, genuinely intelligent. But what happened next in the research was even stranger, because scientists began to ask a follow-up question that no one had thought to ask before. If crows warn each other about dangerous humans, what do they do about safe ones? The answer revealed something about crow society that reframed the entire picture. There is a woman in Japan who walks the same route every morning past a group of crows that congregate near a park. For years, she fed them small pieces of food, left in the same spots, at roughly the same times. Nothing dramatic, just consistent, quiet generosity extended toward birds that most people walk past without acknowledgement. And over those years, something began to happen. The crows began clearing her path, not in any mystical sense, in a very specific, observable, behavioral sense. When she approached areas where other crows were feeding, crows that would normally react with alarm to human proximity, those crows would move aside with a notably reduced alarm response, as though they had received information not just that this particular human was present, but that this particular human was categorized differently, not as a threat, as something closer to a neighbor. Researchers who have studied these relationships describe what they call positive reputation effects in crow communities, the behavioral equivalent of a good reference. A crow that has learned, through direct experience or social transmission, that a specific human is consistently non-threatening, consistently generous, consistently present without harm, will communicate that assessment in ways that change how other crows respond to that person. You can build a reputation with an animal that will outlive you. Because here is the part that stops researchers mid-sentence when they think about it too carefully. Crows live, in the wild, between 7 and 15 years. But the social knowledge they carry does not die with them. It transfers. Parent to juvenile. Elder bird to younger bird. Community memory to the incoming generation. The assessment a crow community makes about a specific human, positive or negative, can persist in the behavioral record of that community for decades. Decades. There are people alive right now who have a good reputation among crow communities in their city, and they have no idea. There are people who, when they walk certain streets, move through a subtle and invisible field of goodwill, because someone before them, in that place, was consistently kind. And there are people moving through the opposite, through a quiet, invisible current of wariness that they did not create, inherited from some prior occupant of the space they now move through. And this is where the story becomes something larger, something that reaches beyond the science of bird behavior and into a question about the kind of world we are actually living in. Crow communities are not flocks in the way most people imagine flocks. They are not loose collections of individuals moving together out of instinct or proximity. They are societies, with rules, with hierarchies, with relationships that span years, with something that functions, in every measurable way, like culture. Crows recognize not just enemies and allies. They recognize social dynamics. They observe how you treat other people. Researchers discovered this through a behavior called eavesdropping, which in crows means something very precise. A crow watching a human interact with another human, or with another crow, is extracting social information. It is learning not just about the immediate interaction, but about the kind of person the human is, the pattern of their behavior, the consistency or inconsistency of their treatment of others. If you are kind to one crow and aggressive to another, in the same vicinity, In the same period of time, the crow community registers the inconsistency. It factors it in. It categorizes you not as simply safe or simply dangerous, but as something more complex, something context-dependent, something to watch more carefully. They are watching for character, not in any mystical sense, in a deeply pragmatic, survival-oriented sense. But the functional outcome is indistinguishable. A crow community, over time, builds something that looks remarkably like a moral assessment of the humans in its territory. Researchers didn't expect what they found next, because when they mapped the human behavior patterns that correlated most strongly with positive crow reputation, the patterns that seemed to generate the most durable goodwill across generations of crow communities, it wasn't dramatic acts of feeding or intentional kindness. It was something far more ordinary, far more fundamental. It was consistent, regular presence, predictable behavior, the quality of being, day after day, the same. Crows, it turns out, trust what they can predict. And the humans they trust most are not the ones who occasionally perform grand gestures of generosity. They are the ones who are simply, reliably, undramatically themselves. The most trustworthy thing you can be, in the assessment of a crow, is someone who behaves the same whether or not you think you are being watched. And the fact that you are always being watched, that you have always been being watched, is the thing this entire story has been building toward. Every city has a crow population. Most cities have thousands. And every one of those birds is participating every day in the maintenance of a social archive that contains information about the humans sharing their territory. Who is safe? Who is dangerous? Who feeds? Who harms? Who is consistent? Who is not? This archive has no central location. It lives in the collective behavior of the community. It is backed up every time a parent crow interacts with a juvenile, every time an alarm call spreads through a flock, every time a group of birds shifts its behavior in response to the presence of a specific face. It is distributed, redundant, and remarkably resilient. It does not require a building or a database or any human infrastructure whatsoever. It requires only crows, living their lives, paying attention. And it has been running, in various forms, for 30 million years. You are a recent entry. Whatever you have done in the presence of crows, every small act of kindness or carelessness, every moment of genuine stillness or unnecessary aggression, every time you walked past without noticing and every time you stopped, all of it has been registered somewhere in that living archive. Processed, communicated, filed. This is not a judgment. It is not a warning. It is simply the truth of the world you have always been living in, described accurately for perhaps the first time. You share your city with a species that has been quietly building a complete behavioral profile of your kind since before your civilization existed. A species with a memory that outlasts individuals, a communication system that moves faster than gossip, and a standard for trustworthiness that is, in its own way, more rigorous than most human institutions can claim. And the most quietly profound part of all of this, the part that deserves a moment of real stillness, is that the crow does not carry its assessments out of malice or judgment or any emotional investment in your moral worth. It carries them because it needs to survive. Because knowing who can be trusted is the fundamental question of every social creature's existence. Because in a world full of unpredictability, a reliable record of human behavior is the most valuable thing a crow community can possess. They are not judging you. They are simply paying attention in a way that we, for all our intelligence, rarely manage to sustain. There is a version of your life that you move through every day without seeing. A version where the ordinary backdrop of birds and trees and wires above your street is not background noise, but active presence. Where the crows on your commute are not decorations, but participants. Where you have been, without knowing it, a character in a story being told in a language you cannot hear, to an audience you cannot see, about a subject you assumed no one was tracking. That version is the real one. The science is not ambiguous. The crows have a system. The system works. The system includes you. And the information it holds about you has been accumulating since the first time a crow in your vicinity made a decision about whether your presence meant safety or danger, and passed that decision on. You cannot undo what is already in the archive, but you can, starting today, begin contributing something different to it, something more intentional, something that, decades from now, Some person walking down your street will benefit from without ever knowing why the crows seem so calm when they pass. Because that is how reputation works in the world that exists beyond human memory. Not in what you said, not in what you intended, in what you did consistently when you thought the only witnesses were birds. The crows were always watching. The only question that remains is the one only you can answer. What have they seen? Drop it in the comments. Have you ever felt like a crow was specifically watching you, tracking you, responding to you differently than it responded to others around you? Because more people have noticed this than ever say it out loud. And I think it is time we started talking about what that means.